So this is a math picture book roundup. I have a whole stack here that I want to talk to you about. It's summertime. I wasn't really feeling like doing anything as serious, so I thought this would be a great time. The other thing that kind of inspired me to make this video is I'm thinking about incorporating picture books in my Math 6 class this year at my co-op, and as I was looking for different picture books, I thought, well, might as well share that information with you. Math picture books, you know, they're always showing up on social media and people are publishing lists. They're a great resource. The one thing I find is not all math picture books are created equal. There's some that I really like and I think are totally worth like doing a read aloud and all sitting together. And there's others that, you know, I got to the end of them and I kind of was like, you know, like for the hassle of getting them. And then there's the ones that I love so much. So I'm like, you should own this. So this is just my list of what I like. I should give credit. Probably 70% of these were actually recommended by all of you because I asked about a month ago, like, what are your favorites? And then I got a whole bunch through my library, was able to read them, review them, and see like, wow, some of these are really great. So thank you for adding, because there's always so much more than what one person can come up with. All right, so I'm gonna show you, obviously show you the books. There'll be a list provided in the notes, but I also wanna talk about how to use it, where I think you could incorporate it if you want it to really fit in with your math curriculum. You don't need to, right? I mean, you can read a book like Hidden Figures and not have it directly correlate with your math that day. That's fine, but sometimes it's really great and you can see some great connections from there. And then also I'm kind of grouping them a little bit so that if you're looking for a certain type of book, you can find those quickly. Let's start by looking at some history math books. So these are the category of where you're learning pretty much normally about a famous mathematician. I think these are a great resource because it helps kids understand that we have discovered math. We have learned math throughout history. Sometimes certain things we thought about math turned out to not be true. And so I think this really helps kids. Obviously, you can tie these in with your history curriculum. I also think normally how we use these in our household is we just read them as we become interested in someone. Typically the math in these is gonna be more complex than what your child is learning. So this is one that we've loved because it's a wonder book at our library, so you can play it and so that my kids can listen to it themselves. It's Sophie Germain. So one of my daughters did this as her biography. She had to do a biography in her lit class. You can be sure that I was really excited. The illustrations are super beautiful. One thing I like is it's a good amount of text, but it's not a crazy amount of text. I get a little overwhelmed when the pages are just like way too much. You can kind of see this, see how pretty it is. And again, we did it as a wonder book, which is like my favorite thing ever, because then my kids can just take the picture book, enjoy the pictures. See how cool the illustrations are? And they don't need me reading it aloud to them because I get a little burnt out, as much as I love reading aloud. All right. Hidden Figures, you know I'm going to talk about this one. So Cathryn Johnson is one of my heroes. We share a name and I just think she's awesome and I love the movie. This is the picture book. Tells the story of these women who worked as computers for NASA. This one folds in really well if you're learning about civil rights and that time period in our history. Also the space race, the math, the actual math is way more complicated than I think that your students will be learning. But it's just great exposure for them. And they did a great job of just showing all the information here. There's also a middle grade novel of this story. And then of course there's a book for adults. So those are other options if you want to go deeper. Okay, that's all I'm going to show for sort of historical math books, picture book biographies. There are so many more. I'll put a link to Sarah Mackenzie's list of math picture books. That's from her website. She loves picture book biographies, which is great. I mean, I think they're great too. But there's so many, and you probably could choose those based on what connects with the history that you're learning about. It's so broad. I can't show them all. Okay, so let's talk about counting books for a little bit. So I grabbed a few. This one was cute. I was kind of like, it wasn't great. It wasn't, you know, it was adorable. They were buying groceries and stuff. The whole idea of these counting books is that you have lots of pictures where your kids can count up the hands and, you know, practice counting to 10. Some people were saying that some other suggestions for this, like the Richard Scarry book, someone suggested, I haven't actually looked at it, but I'm sure it's wonderful. We have this one where they count back, which is kind of cute. But these are all kind of like the same a little bit. So I feel like when it comes to counting books, a lot of times what you can do is just get a book that's about something that interests your kid, because there's so much counting. So if your kid really loves reptiles, you probably can find a counting book on reptiles, that type of thing. We do really like this one, 1, 2, 3 Ps. We have it as a board book, so we've read it when our kids are really young. I like that it's written in a rhyme. So when I'm reading aloud, a rhyme makes a big difference for me. It's not a lot of text per page. And then I like that it goes up higher. So once you get to 10, the pictures are interesting too, like what the Ps are doing. They kind of jump through the teen numbers, and then they start counting by tens. And so because of that, your child still gets exposed to these larger numbers, and you get all the way to 100 without counting to 100. So that one's my favorite counting book, but probably the counting books, personal preference. All right, multiplication. So this one I grabbed, I'm pretty sure this was on Sarah Mackenzie's list. I loved this book. Oh my goodness. So it's a Toon book. So it's a little bit like a very early graphic novel, how it's written, and it's arrays. So they have to do 3 groups of 4 or 4 groups of 3. And this is such a great pick if say you're doing Apologia Math level 3, and they're just getting introduced to the concept of multiplication. The picture of an array, that like grid, is such a great way to introduce multiplication. So this one, you could read at any time. Obviously you can use it to reinforce. This is one of my favorite pages here with the trees, but it is an excellent resource if you have a child who's just getting ready to learn multiplication. It's a great way to introduce it. All right, definitely loved this one. This one, okay, Multiplying Menace, The Revenge of Rumpelstiltskin, I adored. I actually hadn't read it before, which I'm sure you'll be like shocked, because I realize it's like kind of famous. And there's other books in the series, but I have of course seen it, and then someone recommended it to me when I asked for picture books, got it through the library, and I was really impressed. Like, I knew it'd be good, but all right, so it's like a fairy tale with multiplication. That can be cheesy, right? No, it was cute. But the best thing was it has a lot of really rich mathematics in it. So Rumpelstiltskin is multiplying things and causing all kinds of sort of mayhem by multiplying. And then to solve the mystery, Peter has to kind of figure out how the multiplication stick works, but it involves reciprocals, whether he's trying to make a bigger number or a smaller number. And here's a good picture to show you. He's sort of figuring out that if you multiply by something less than 1, it gets smaller. So there's this little poem at the end. Times a whole will make you many, times a fraction leaves hardly any, times a 0 will leave no one, multiplying Menace is on the run. That is like really rich mathematics. I actually just used some of those principles today because one of my kids made a mistake multiplying decimals, and I showed them, like, even though you didn't know what the exact answer was, you should have been able to realize that the answer was going to be bigger. So highly recommend that one. I'm getting a couple of the other ones from this series through the library. All right, I want to show you a few that are a little random. I don't really have a category for these, but let's start with these. Okay, so these are by Stephen Kellogg. Well, they're illustrated by Stephen Kellogg. They're not by Stephen Kellogg. They're by David Schwartz. They're picture books about $1 million. So we own If You Made $1 Million, and this is How Much is $1 Million. I would definitely recommend this. This one's showing 1 million stars or something close to it. I just opened the page. Okay, yes. So I think it's in level 4 of Apologia Math. When kids start working with really big numbers, it's so hard for kids to grasp what are they even doing, right? So having pictures and things that show you, like, how long would it take if we were going to count from 1 to 1 trillion? Well, there's a big number, right? If we're gonna stack all these kids. The illustrations are really fun. There's like funny things happening in them. I think these are good to own. And there's one more, Millions to Measure. I think that I would have this on my shelf so you can just grab it as your kids reach that content. All right, we got this one for free from the library. It's kind of cute. Pigs will be pigs. So these pigs, they like need money. I think it's a teacher who wrote this. I have to remember. So they go on a money hunt through their house, which would not work in our house because we never have cash. And then they go out to eat, and it's kind of all about like having enough money and thinking things through. The best part is there is a menu that they show you, and they ask the kids questions. Let me show you here. All right. So they have different questions and then answers that the kids can answer. My kids love doing this on their own and coming up with the answers. All right, this is probably my most random recommendation. Probably a lot of people will be like, that is not a math picture book. This book, I love this book. This is a cute book. We love the Elephant and Piggy series. So why do I love this book? So in this book, there are 3 cookies and 4 friends. And it's just a whole dramatic story about what are they going to do. And they end up breaking the cookies into fourths and splitting it evenly. This is such a great introduction to fractions. I often have my students read this or have one of my kids read this to just give them a distinct scenario where fractions happen. So I love this one. All right, the next thing I want to show you is the Circumference series. So there's even more than this. There's a lot. This one is my favorite, so I'm going to show you this one. So this is Circumference and the first round table. There's lots of like math jokes in here. So one of the King's Knight is Circumference, yes, and then there's Lady Di, who's from the town of Amateur. So, and then her son Radius is like half as tall as her. So there's Lady Di, there's Radius. So that part's cute. This one I like. It screams for a math project to me because it's like they have this table and they keep changing the shape because the knights keep arguing. And so my favorite part about this is the way they change the shape and the way they show it is creative. And so what I would love to do with this book is have the kids read it, but then do some type of project in my co-op class where I give them paper and they have to cut and try to actually do this. And you kind of gradually get closer and closer to the shape of a circle so that everyone can sit the same distance. I do think it would definitely help you remember the terms. There's more. I mean, I quickly read this one before getting on here and I'm like, it was fine. It was about rounding, like friendly numbers. I'm sure some of you love it, but I thought it was fine. I wasn't like, oh, that was like so great. I have other ones I like more, I guess what I should say. Lastly, I want to talk about Greg Tang, who is probably my favorite, but you know, personal preference. So I have a bunch of his here and I don't even have all of his. So we own this one, Masterpieces. There's a lot of cool things about this. The illustrations are famous works of art. And so such a fun blend, right? So we're looking at this one as a family, and I actually studied abroad in France where Paul Cézanne is from. And so I don't think I had seen this, but I had like seen something similar to this. So we're talking about that. So cool. And then we did a little bit of math. So this book is number bonds. So different ways to make certain amounts. So on this page, you're trying to find ways to make 10 by combining the bowls. I'll show you an easier page just so you can see it is accessible. So of course we're a ballet household, so we loved this one. And you have to make sets of 7 shoes. And it's very creative, right? They don't just do the obvious like 2 and 5. There's also, you know, he includes like doing 1 and then this one and this. So I love Greg Tang. I'll just start with why I love him so much, because he works very well in a family math read aloud, because there's something that the littlest person can look at and be interested in and count. And then there's something that the middle person can do. And then there's sometimes an extra challenge or a cool trick that an older kid can find. So that's Masterpieces. The Grapes of Math. We own this one as well. This is probably my favorite. I guess it's counting up totals. So let me show you one where it's like really obvious, kind of. Okay, so like Snail Parade. he asks you to count out how many snails there are. But in the rhyme, he gives a hint that rows and rows of snails I spied. How do I count them all? I cried. Don't just group the one you see. Consider where a snail should be. So the trick is to count the whole grid by multiplication and then just subtract. What I love is, yes, that's the way the poem is telling you to do it, but there's other ways to find the total. So when we read this as a family and we're counting up these pages, everybody tries to get there their own way, and then we talk about how they answered it. And my littlest one just counts, right? So it's okay. That discussion is like my favorite thing. Okay, that's the grapes of math. Math potatoes. This one is more of like the grapes of math. It's just different pictures. So it's kind of the same idea. These riddles and these pictures. I think it's just all about food in this one. There's one of music though. So if you love grapes of math. And then Math Fables 2, there's also a Math Fables, but this is the one I was able to grab. This one's cool because it combines. So it's a counting book and it counts things in nature, and he uses science to explain what you're looking at in the picture. But then once you count, so this is the page for 4, he also does number bounds. So he shows you 3 and 1, and then he's gonna show you 2 and 2, and then he's gonna show you 4 and 0. So if you use Apologia Math Level 1, you know all about number bonds, right? It's a big thing to practice. A picture book like this is such a great way to reinforce it. Another great category of picture books are things that show exponential growth or exponential functions. That sounds like really just doubling is typically what it is. So this is what actually inspired me to even gather all these picture books, because this year in Math 6, I am going to, I don't know if I'm gonna make it optional or required, but I'm gonna have the kids read this picture book when we first learn about doubling, which is the first exponential function that they'll be exposed to. So this is one of the best things about picture books, is that kids can see it, right? Because there's pictures. So it just really helps them grasp a concept in a way that a math book, the actual textbook, it's a little harder to show. So one option for this is 1 grain of rice. I really like this one. This is probably my favorite. It's set in India, and we love all things India. It's based on that folk tale that gets told in different ways, where someone asks for 1 grain of rice and then they say double it each day. Or sometimes they say use a chessboard and put 1 grain on the first square, 2 on the next. There's different versions. There's actually a picture book about the chessboard version. I'll show you the pictures. So there's a Raja. He's actually being very selfish. So that's one thing I like about this version, is in this one, the mathematician kind of like helps the people, which is nice. So she asks for the rice, and then, you know, at first it's just 1 grain, and then it starts to get much more. And then watch this. So when it gets much, much more, you actually get these like fold out pages to show how much more. This is something that will stick with a 11 or 12-year-old about how quickly things double. So reading a picture book like this gives them an image of how powerful that function is, okay? All right. This is another great one for showing exponential growth. Everything by this author is excellent, but this one is more advanced. So in this book, there's seeds, and it's more complicated because every time they have a seed, they eat one of them and then they plant. And so it's a more complicated function. And in this one, they actually ask the kids as they go, how many, like what's gonna, let me see if I can find a page where they do it. So in the beginning, there's just the story, and then there's kind of like a little plot twist, and then they start asking you, well, how many fruits will grow in Jack's garden next fall? So most likely, I will be using this book in my Apologia Math 6 class, and we will have like a worksheet that we do together, or the kids do at home, to talk about it. The only, my son said, it's pretty hard. It's right. Like it gets, the math in here gets a little complicated because you have to remember they ate some and then how much is left. So it's definitely something where you want to make a table, but still you can see the pictures and see how quickly things are going to grow. It's also kind of a beautiful story about farming. this is not a Christian book, but what immediately came to mind for me is the parable about like seeds bearing fruit, hundredfold. So I will probably do that as a tie-in with this because it's right there. Only disadvantage, I don't see answers. So I will have to sit through and write it all out unless I can find that online somewhere. Because like I said, the math is a little complex. All right, I probably missed some great ones, so feel free to post in the comments anything you think I missed, anything that you check out and try, whether you add it to your morning basket or you actually try to pair it with specific math lessons or bring it into your co-op. I think picture books are just a great way to jazz things up.